What is your scariest true story? True story time. I was about 4 or 5 years old and my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a two-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I preferred to sleep in her bed whenever I was staying with her. Our two bedrooms were at the end of a hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the first floor, and I remember that it was in the middle of the summer, and my mom had a window open her room, which was directly behind the bed above the headboard. Anyways, I woke up in the middle of the night and remember sitting up and seeing that our cat was sitting in the door frame of my mom's room. Or her door was open and you could partially see into my bedroom. This was strange because our cat was typically always in bed with us. As I was watching him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to face my mom and wake her up. In the 3, 4 seconds it took her to wake up and ask me what was wrong, we both looked back up in the door frame and there was a man standing by my open door, making his way out of my bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do it so quickly, but my mother proceeded to pick me up and literally throw me out of the screen window. Again, we were on the first floor and it was maybe a 3 foot drop to the ground. She quickly followed and we were able to start screaming for help, and someone called 911. The police came, but didn't see any signs of forced entry, only that our front door was unlocked, which led them to believe the man must have exited that way. The strange thing was that my mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night with the deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, she was cleaning the kitchen and opened up our water heater closet and found a notebook with names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The police were called again, but all they could do was speculate that the man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep. A terrifying but true story I experienced when I was 12. I moved to my dad's when I was 10 and didn't know anyone in the area, except for the family my dad was friends with. Single mom with 3 kids. Luckily, there was a girl a couple years older than me, 12 at the time I met her. And we got to know each other a little over a couple years. We weren't close, but ended up having the same friends. One night, my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because my friend's mom was at work, which is where this gets terrifying and sad. Her mother has been helping this one lady through her work and got to know her fairly well. She found out her sister was in a mental institution and was let out recently. The night Rob is hanging out with my friend, they get a knock on the door. My friend thought it was just their mom. She knocks a certain way when coming in and answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there, and he took off through the window to his house down the road. He never thought twice about it. Wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the lady her mom was helping, and she figured out through talking to her sister where her family lived and her mom's working schedule. She came in, and this is where is don't know details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbors to call the police. The lady brutally murdered my friend a week from Christmas, decapitated her, and left her body naked in a bathtub. Hit her head. They had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral. I was sitting in my room after getting out of work on the second floor. Little bro's downstairs watching TV. The dog is in the hallway outside my door, sleeping. All of a sudden, dog starts making all kinds of racket, jumping around, barking, clacking nails, howling. I go to get up to see what's up, and I hear, "Ah, that's a good girl," in a male voice. It didn't sound like little bro, so I go, "Oh, you're home early," thinking it is my dad's friend, our roomie, as I open the door. Soon as I'm out there, there is no one at all but the dog wagging her tail, staring at the empty end of the hallway. Little bro comes upstairs to yell at me for getting his dog riled up, said he heard the same voice thinking it was me or our roommate. We did a once-over of the house with my butterfly knife and his BB gun, and there was nobody. Still gives me the spooks to this day. I spent a solid weekend playing on the computer a few years ago, drinking a lot of ephedra and coffee and generally not sleeping much. Every so often, I'd feel an itch on my arms, like a loose hair falling onto them. I'd brush it off and go back to staring at the computer. As this itching was happening more frequently and becoming more intense, I started wondering if I was just imagining things or delusional from the tea and insomnia. But then I noticed what appeared to be tiny spiders on my arms. Am I going crazy? Are these drug bugs? Or what? And I went back to the screen. Then I saw strings of thin webs glistening in the light and tiny spiders floating past my vision. They were real indeed. I noticed a hole in the ceiling where they appeared to be falling from. I blasted a can of wasp spray into the hole, and hundreds of these little spiders began pouring out, streaming from their webs. Hundreds of them all over me. My grandmother lives in a very old house, late 1700 AS, which is surrounded by graveyards on both sides. The other day, my friend, who I hadn't seen for months, arrives at my house. We are walking along the old cobblestone driveway when he begins talking about his newfound spirituality, not in a religious context, but with regards to feeling tuned in to things. I believed him. He had been away at a drug treatment program, and I believe that he had experienced some kind of cerebral spiritual awakening. Anyways, as we are talking, my cat walks over to us and starts rubbing up against my leg. After a while, I realize she won't quit and that she is trying to tell me something. I start to follow her, and soon I realize she is going to the graveyard. Every time I stop following her, she turns around and rubs my leg until I begin walking again. When we finally get to the graveyard, she jumps up on a gravestone, balancing on the slender part of the gravestone, and will not move. She begins hissing when we try to take her off the headstone. We realize that the grave was someone who had lived and died in our house. My friend took this picture of the cat on the gravestone. My sister and I were playing outside when we were younger, and an elderly couple was walking by our yard. Our yard had a cemetery in the back, so it was quite a common local attraction for tourists as this house was built in the 1800s, and most of the graves were from children who died back then from the flu, etc. There are some creepy stories from that place, but nothing lives up to what happened all those years ago. Playing outside, and this old couple kept pestering my sister about what her name was as they approached us and got closer. We were just little kids and got terribly scared and ran inside and told our mom what had happened. The following week, I heard a story on the news about an elderly couple approaching a teenage girl, kidnapping her and raping her, and it was the same couple that had approached my sister and I. I still get creeped out by that.
When I was a kid, the thing I hated to do the most was take my clothes downstairs to the basement and place them in a big pile next to the laundry machine so that my mom would wash them. That side of the basement was not finished, and it freaking terrified me. I had so many nightmares about the place, like crazy, reoccurring nightmares that I would realize when they were happening, but I was unable to escape them. One of the nightmares was that I would be up and around the house with no one else at home, and then I would become aware that it was approaching the time. I don't know what time it was, but I could feel it in my bones that bad things were about to happen. So I would get under the kitchen table. The door to the basement was in the kitchen, and then the basement door would open and I could see the legs of some man. I never knew who it was and never saw his face, but I knew that if this creature caught me out in the open, it would do terrible things to me. The worst thing was the thought that it knew I was under the table, but it enjoyed the fact that I was so afraid, hiding under there trying not to be seen or heard. Sometimes, either at the end of an unrelated dream or on its own, I'd be walking down the stairs into the basement, and when I stepped off the last step, I was plunged into total darkness, and something would grab me. I can't explain the terror this produced in me. and the fact that I knew at the top of the stairs what was about to happen, and I could not stop walking. There were other crazy dreams like that, all taking place in the basement or about the basement. I hated the basement. One day when I had to take my laundry down, I was home alone except for my dog. So I decide it'll be better to have her down there with me than have to go by myself. I grab my laundry, call the dog, and head down the stairs. It's daylight. Light is streaming down the stairs and into the basement through these small slit windows, and nothing is all that terrifying. I saunter over to the machine, casually toss my clothes onto the pile, and start to make my way back up the stairs. Previous boldness aside, I always run up the stairs because I hate the basement. I was a scrawny kid, so you could barely hear my feet tapping up the stairs. Suddenly, all I can hear is this insane thudding and scrambling. Coming up the stairs behind me! My brain almost literally shut down. I screamed with terror. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, and I couldn't even continue moving up the stairs. I simply fell onto the stairs and curled up into a ball. Can you even imagine growing up and being told monsters aren't real, and then facing the moment where your worst nightmare is about to murder you in your own home? I just shut my eyes as tight as I could and waited to die. Then my dog started licking my face, excited to be playing a fun new game called Race You Up the Stairs. I was with my boyfriend at the time. We were laying in my bed and the lights were out. We weren't talking, just both thinking. All of the sudden he rolls over and hugs me really tightly. I, of course, hug him back. But then this feeling just hit me. If I wasn't already laying down, it would have knocked me over. It was a total feeling of dread and panic. I'll admit, I have had panic attacks in the past, but this was not the same. I hugged my boyfriend back as hard as I could. I never felt a feeling like this before. My boyfriend is one of those people who always is really warm, but even in his arms I felt ice cold. I could feel this evil, awful feeling, and it seemed like it was coming from the corner of my room. It was kind of like sensing your friend behind you when they aren't saying anything. I honestly believe there was a demon or something in my room. I got the courage to speak and I said, "Jay, do you feel that?" And he said he did. The cold, evil feeling. This all happened in about 30 seconds to a minute. He decided to call his friend who was studying to be a youth pastor. I got up and turned the lights on and came back to the bed. He called Matt and put him on speakerphone. Matt prayed for us, and we both closed our eyes and listened, praying in our heads. When the prayer was done, the room felt lighter and it wasn't cold anymore. But after a little small talk afterwards, Matt asked, "Were you two talking while I was praying?" We were like, "Of course not. We were just listening." He said he heard from the phone, a deep, gravelly voice telling him to stop. And he said he felt an awful, evil feeling overcome him while he was praying. Fucking freaked me out. Boyfriend drove home immediately afterwards because he was super freaked out. I was kind of mad he wouldn't stay with me because I was scared too. I went in my dad's room to tell him I thought a demon came into my room. He was sleeping though and just muttered something about having a gun and he'd shoot it. Thanks, Dad.
This will probably get buried, but I've never told anyone this. Now is as good a time as any. I suppose, Dot. When I was about 8, 9, we lived in a house that my father built for us in the middle of nowhere. Indiana. My parents owned a small business that often brought clients to our remote little homestead, and over the years we met some rather odd people. One such person was a strange man that gave me the heebie-jeebies as soon as I saw him. He arrived at our home in a black car with tinted windows, wearing all black with a black hat and dark sunglasses. His demeanor was very strange, and he was very interested in our black Persian cat named Mercedes. Nevertheless, he left after his consultation with my parents, but later at dinner, everyone admitted that he set them on edge. That night, Mercedes came down very ill. A few days later, after an illness the local vet couldn't diagnose that included the cat vomiting up gobs of what appeared to be black tar, Mercedes died. In her final moments, she would swat and hiss at something in the air. I'll never forget the chill I got when she took her last breath. After this, many strange things began happening around our home. We'd find footprints in the show that started and stopped out of nowhere. Noises in the middle of the night. The wallpaper would be torn halfway off the walls. My mother, who has always been somewhat of a sensitive person, claimed to start seeing demonic creatures around the house and became rather withdrawn. I had asthma, but had been a long while without an attack. Soon after all of this began happening, I started having episodes again. I was very sick one night, so I slept on the floor next to my mother's side of the bed in my parents' bedroom. Under their bed and around there were a bunch of boxes, family photos, wrapping paper, etc. Things that we'd been meaning to store elsewhere. In the middle of the night, I had a particularly bad asthma attack. I heard my mother wake up screaming, "Get away from her," and trying to get to me. Every box from under the bed and around the room had been stacked between where I lay on the floor and my mother's side of the bed, preventing her from getting to me. She finally reached me and gave me my inhaler, and she cried all night. She never told me what she saw that night. But strange things continued to happen for several more months. We had the house blessed and tried everything we could. Eventually, the activity started to slow. My brother and his family live in the house now, and they hear unexplainable sounds every so often, but nothing like what happened that winter. I grew up to be quite a skeptic, but I still can't explain what happened that year. I just tell myself it was all in our heads.